The phone call came at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time I now associate with the precise moment my life split into two distinct eras, before and after. Before, the world was governed by predictable rhythms, the hum of my office computer, the taste of lukewarm coffee, the comforting knowledge that my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was safe in her second-grade classroom, learning about fractions or the life cycle of a butterfly. After, the world became a place of shadows and whispers, where the most familiar faces could hide the most monstrous secrets. The caller ID showed the number for Lily's elementary school, and my first thought was a dull maternal panic. A fall on the playground, a fever, a forgotten lunchbox, mundane crises. I answered with a practiced, calm voice, the one I used to soothe clients and my own child. "This is Clara Hale." The voice on the other end was hesitant, professionally gentle. It was Miss Albright, Lily's teacher. She was a kind woman in her late 40s with warm eyes and a genuine love for her students. "Mrs. Hale, I apologize for interrupting your day. Lily is perfectly fine. I want to assure you of that right away. She's not sick or hurt." I felt the knot in my chest loosen, but only for a second. Her tone was wrong. It wasn't the breezy "she forgot her jacket" call. This was something else, something heavier. "But," she continued, drawing the word out, "something came up today during our creative arts time that I felt I needed to discuss with you privately. It's a bit sensitive." My mind raced through the possibilities. Had Lily said something inappropriate? Gotten into a fight? "Of course," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "What happened?" There was a rustle of paper on her end. "We were doing an activity called Drawing a Memory. I asked the children to draw a picture of a time they remember, happy or sad. It helps them process their feelings." Lily drew a picture of her uncle, of your brother, Leo. A fresh wave of grief, sharp and sudden as it always was, washed over me. It had only been 6 months since we lost him. 6 months since my vibrant, funny, endlessly kind younger brother had died in a tragic, stupid accident, falling down the basement stairs at his own home. The official report said he'd tripped, likely over a tool he'd left out, and the fall had been fatal. His wife, my sister-in-law Evelyn, had found him. The pain was still a raw, open wound for all of us. "Oh," I managed, my throat closing up. That's sweet of her. She misses him terribly." "Yes," Ms. Albright said softly. "But Clara, the drawing, it's not just of him. It shows the accident." I felt my stomach clench. Why would Lily draw that? We had tried so hard to shield her from the graphic details, telling her only that Uncle Leo had an accident and was now an angel. "She drew the stairs," the teacher explained, her voice dropping lower, as if she were afraid of being overheard. "And she drew a stick figure of a man falling. She wrote Uncle Leo next to him. But there's another figure at the top of the stairs, Clara, a woman. And this figure has its hands out, touching his back." I couldn't breathe. The air in my sterile office suddenly felt thick and suffocating. The hum of the computer faded to a distant buzz. And next to the woman, Ms. Albright's voice was barely a whisper now. Lily wrote a name. She wrote Auntie E. Evelyn. My mind refused to process the implication. It was a cartoonish, impossible horror. Evelyn, who had sobbed on my shoulder for weeks. Evelyn, who couldn't even look at a photograph of Leo without her eyes welling up. Evelyn, who had loved my brother since they were teenagers. It was absurd. It was a child's misunderstanding. "There must be some mistake," I said, the words feeling clumsy and foreign in my mouth. "Lily must be confused. Maybe she saw something on TV, or she's mixed up memories. Evelyn found him. She was heartbroken. She couldn't." "I know this is shocking," Ms. Albright said, her professional sympathy a thin blanket against the chill that was seeping into my bones. Children process trauma in unusual ways. They can conflate stories they've heard with their own memories. But the way she described it when I asked her, she was very matter-of-fact. She said, "Auntie E was playing a surprise game with Uncle Leo. She wanted to surprise him. She said it was a pushing surprise." "Clara, I'm a mandated reporter. I haven't filed anything, and I wanted to speak with you first because of the circumstances, but the image and her words, they were very specific. I felt you had to know." I was silent, staring unseeingly at a stack of spreadsheets on my desk. The numbers swam before my eyes. A surprise game, a pushing surprise. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of my mind. I thought of Evelyn's grief. It had been theatrical, almost cinematic. Her wails at the funeral, her perfectly timed collapses into the arms of concerned relatives. At the time, I'd seen it as the profound devastation of a shattered heart. But now, viewed through the horrifying lens of a child's drawing, it felt performed. I remembered her strange composure just days after, when she was dealing with the insurance paperwork, her focus sharp and her voice clear. I had chalked it up to her being practical, of needing to control something when her world was out of control. Was it something else? "Clara, are you still there?" Miss Albright's voice pulled me back. "Yes," I croaked. "Yes, I'm here. Thank you for calling me. Thank you for telling me first. I'll talk to Lily." "I've packed the drawing in her backpack," she said gently. "Take care, Clara." The line went dead. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, my hand still clutching the phone, my knuckles white. The world had tilted on its axis. My brother's death, a cornerstone of my recent life, a solid, unchangeable tragedy, had just developed a hairline crack. And I had the sickening feeling that if I pressed on it, even gently, the entire foundation of my family, of my reality, would crumble into dust. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and walked out of the office, ignoring the confused look from my boss. All I could think about was the drive to the school, the little girl I would have to face, and the monstrous picture tucked away in her pink unicorn backpack. I had to see it. I had to know. But a part of me, a deep, terrified part, already knew that once I looked, I could never unsee it. The drive to Lily's school was a blur of traffic lights and brake lights. My mind a maelstrom of denial and burgeoning horror. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was a mistake, a grotesque misunderstanding, born from a child's overactive imagination and the confusing fragments of adult conversation she'd undoubtedly overheard. Kids were sponges. They absorbed the ambient stress and tried to make sense of it in their own crude, symbolic language. Lily must have heard someone say Evelyn was pushed to her limit by grief, or that Leo's fall had pushed her over the edge. A literal interpretation of a figure of speech. It had to be that. Anything else was unthinkable. To even entertain the alternative felt like a betrayal not only of Evelyn, my sister-in-law, my family, but of Leo himself. It felt like desecrating his memory with a plot twist from a cheap thriller. Yet beneath the rationalizations, a cold dread was spreading through my veins. It was the same feeling I'd had as a child when I'd look into a dark basement, knowing there was nothing there but convinced a monster was waiting just beyond the reach of the light. The monster, in this case, wore the face of my brother's grieving widow. When I arrived, the final bell had just rung, and the schoolyard was a chaotic swirl of shouting children and waiting parents. I saw Lily standing near the flagpole, her pink backpack a bright spot in the sea of muted fall colors. She was talking to a friend, her expression open and happy. She looked so impossibly normal. My heart ached. How could I ask her about this? How could I introduce such a terrible poison into her innocent world? She saw me and her face lit up. "Mommy!" She ran into my arms, burying her face in my coat. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of chalk dust and playground air, trying to anchor myself to this moment of pure, uncomplicated love. "Hey, sweet pea," I said, forcing my voice to sound light. "How was your day?" "It was good. We made memory drawings. I drew one of Uncle Leo," she announced proudly, her voice loud enough for a few nearby parents to hear. I felt my smile freeze on my face. A woman I knew from the PTA gave me a look of deep sympathy. "Oh, that's so sweet," she said. "It's so important for them to remember." I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat. On the short drive home, Lily chattered on about her day, about who got a gold star and who had to sit out at recess. I made all the right noises, the "oh reallys" and "that's nice, honey," but my mind was elsewhere. I was rehearsing the conversation, trying to find the right words, the gentle, non-leading questions that wouldn't plant a single new idea in her head. When we got home, the silence of the house felt heavy. I made Lily a snack of apple slices and cheese, my hands moving on autopilot. We sat at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slanting through the window. This was it. I took a deep breath. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Miss Albright told me about your beautiful drawing today, the one of Uncle Leo. Can you tell me about it?" She looked up, her mouth full of apple. "It was the day he went to be an angel," she said, her tone completely matter-of-fact. I remember it. My blood ran cold. You remember it? But honey, you weren't there. You were here with me that day." She shook her head, a stubborn set to her little jaw. "No, I saw it on Auntie E's computer." And just like that, the foundation cracked wide open. Evelyn had been video chatting with us that morning, a regular weekend ritual. Lily had been sitting on my lap. I had gotten up to get a glass of water from the kitchen, leaving Lily babbling at the screen to her aunt for just a minute or two. I'd been gone for no more than 90 seconds. "What did you see on the computer, Lily?" I asked, my voice now a strained whisper. "Auntie E was showing me her new flowers on the porch," she explained patiently, as if talking to a slow-witted adult. Then she said, "Hold on, sweetie, Uncle Leo is home." And she turned the computer. She meant her laptop. Evelyn must have picked up the laptop and carried it with her. She went to the door and she was talking to him. He was being silly. He said he was going to his cave, and she said, "I have a surprise for you first." My heart was hammering against my ribs. And then what happened? She put the computer down on the little table by the door. I could see the stairs, the ones that go boom, boom, boom. She meant the basement stairs. Uncle Leo went to the door and Auntie E came up behind him, and she gave him a big, big push, like a surprise, and he fell down. It was a surprise game. She took another bite of her apple, completely untroubled. To her, it was just a story, a memory stripped of its terrifying context. A game. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I steadied myself on the table. Honey, after he fell, what did Auntie E do? Lily frowned, thinking hard. She looked down for a long time. She was very quiet. Then she picked up the computer, and her face was all sad. And she said, "Oh, Lily, I think Uncle Leo fell. I have to go. Bye-bye." And she turned it off. I finally found the courage to open her backpack. There, tucked inside a folder, was the drawing. It was exactly as Ms. Albright had described. A crude crayon drawing of a house, of stairs. Falling man, a smiling woman pushing him, and the childish scrawl, Auntie E. The smile was the worst part. It wasn't a malicious smile. It was the simple, curved line of a happy face, the kind a child draws. To Lily, it was a game, a surprise. But to me, it was the face of a monster, sketched by the only witness. I spent the rest of the evening on autopilot, making dinner, giving Lily a bath, reading her a bedtime story. But my mind was 1,000 miles away, replaying that day, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Evelyn since. Every tear, every pained sigh, every lament about her lost love now seemed like a carefully constructed lie. And the most chilling part was how easily I had believed it all. In the days that followed Ms. Albright's call, I lived in a state of suspended animation, a waking nightmare where every shadow seemed to lengthen and every familiar sound took on a sinister edge. I moved through the motions of my life, work, school runs, grocery shopping, but it was as if I were watching a movie of myself, a detached observer to my own hollow performance. The drawing, which I had hidden at the bottom of my lingerie drawer, felt like a radioactive object, pulsing with a terrible energy that contaminated the entire house. My primary instinct was to protect Lily, to wrap her in a cocoon of normalcy and keep the encroaching darkness at bay. But my secondary and increasingly powerful instinct was a cold, rising fury on behalf of my brother, Leo, who had loved Evelyn with a devotion that was sometimes frustrating in its blindness. He had seen her as perfect, a delicate creature to be cherished and protected. He would have laughed if someone had suggested she was capable of anything other than gentle kindness. He'd have been angry, defensive. The irony was a bitter pill. While he was busy protecting her, who was protecting him from her? My sleep was fractured by restless dreams. I'd see the drawing animated, the crayon figures moving in a jerky, horrifying loop. I'd see Evelyn's face, not as Lily had drawn it, with an innocent smile, but as I now imagined it in that moment, cold, resolved, triumphant. I started to dissect every memory I had of her and Leo, sifting through years of shared holidays, dinners, and casual conversations, searching for the overlooked clue, the discordant note. And the more I looked, the more I found. I remembered Leo calling me about a month before his death, sounding troubled. He and Evelyn had been arguing about money, not unusual for a married couple, but the source of the conflict was specific. Our grandparents had left us both a modest but significant inheritance. I had put mine into savings for Lily's college fund. Leo, ever the dreamer, wanted to use his to finally quit his soul-crushing accounting job and open a custom woodworking shop. It was his lifelong passion. She hates the idea, he had told me, his voice laced with confusion. She says it's too risky, that we should use the money to pay off the mortgage. She called my dream a selfish indulgence. It's not like her, Clara, She's always been my biggest cheerleader. At the time, I dismissed it as pre-investment jitters, advising him to give her time to come around. Now his words echoed with a chilling new meaning. It wasn't about risk, it was about control. The money represented Leo's independence, a future he was building for himself, by himself, a future that perhaps she felt she couldn't fully manage. The day he died, he was on his way to meet with a real estate agent to sign the lease on a workshop space. He had been ecstatic that morning, texting me a picture of the building with the caption, "The dream begins." Evelyn must have known. That was the surprise, not a game, but a final brutal end to his dream. Then the phone rang one evening and my heart seized when I saw Evelyn's name on the screen. Her voice, when I answered, was a warm, syrupy balm that made my skin crawl. "Clara, sweetie, I was just thinking about you. It feels like we haven't talked in ages." It had been 4 days. "I've been busy with work," I lied, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. "How are you holding up?" "Oh, you know," she sighed, a masterfully performed catch in her voice. "Good days and bad days, mostly bad. The house is so empty without him. Every corner holds a memory." I thought of the basement stairs and felt a surge of nausea. "I was thinking," she continued, her tone brightening artificially, "why don't you and my precious Lily come over for dinner this weekend? I'll make that lasagna Leo loved so much. It would be so good to see you both." The invitation felt like a trap. The thought of being in that house, of eating her food, of watching her play, the loving, grieving aunt, to the only witness of her crime, was more than I could bear. My mind raced for an excuse. "Oh, Evelyn, that's so sweet of you, but Lily has that nasty cold that's going around her school. I think we should probably just lay low this weekend." It was a weak lie, and I could almost feel her skepticism through the phone. "Oh, the poor thing. Well, another time then. Send her my love and a big kiss. I miss my little angel." My little angel. The words dripped with a possessive sweetness that was suddenly terrifying. She wasn't just my daughter, she was Evelyn's precious Lily, her little angel. A witness to be kept close, to be monitored. After I hung up, I leaned against the kitchen counter, my body trembling. The threat was no longer a vague, abstract horror. It was real, and it had just invited me to dinner. She was testing me, probing. Her call wasn't a casual check-in, it was surveillance. She needed to ensure her narrative was holding, that the grieving family was still grieving in the appropriate way. My quiet avoidance was a deviation from the script, and she was moving to correct it. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in the dark of my living room, the city lights a distant, indifferent glow. I couldn't go to the police. What did I have? The crayon drawing of a 7-year-old and a mother's frantic, grief-stricken suspicions. They would order a psychological evaluation for me before they ever looked at Evelyn. They would call social services on me for putting ideas in my daughter's head. I was alone in this. The weight of that realization was crushing. But as the first hints of dawn began to gray the sky, something inside me shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something harder, sharper. It crystallized into resolve. Leo was gone. He couldn't speak for himself, but I could, and Lily, in her own innocent way, already had. I wouldn't let Evelyn turn her into a victim or, worse, an accomplice silenced by affection. I had to find proof, real, undeniable proof that would tear down the facade of the grieving widow and expose the monster hiding underneath. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to try. For Leo and for Lily, the decision to act, to move from a passive state of fear to one of active investigation, was like stepping off a cliff in the dark. I had no idea what lay below, only that staying where I was meant a slow, suffocating surrender. My life became a study in compartmentalization. To the outside world, to my colleagues, to the other parents at school, I was the same Clara Hale, a bit more subdued perhaps, a woman still navigating the landscape of grief, but functional. Inside, however, a different person was taking shape. She was methodical, calculating, and fueled by a cold, quiet rage that burned away the fog of sorrow. I understood now that I couldn't trust my memories alone. They were too subjective, too easily dismissed. I needed something concrete, something that existed outside of my own head and Lily's crayon drawing. My first thought was financial. Greed was a simple, powerful motive. I spent hours online learning about probate law, about how assets are transferred after a death. Leo hadn't had a will. They were young and had assumed they had all the time in the world. That meant, under state law, Evelyn inherited everything. The house, his savings, and most importantly, the inheritance from our grandparents that he had been so excited to invest. I managed to get in touch with the family lawyer who had handled our grandparents' estate, a kindly old man named Mr. Davison. Under the guise of clarifying some details about my own portion of the inheritance, I gently steered the conversation toward Leo's. I was just so glad he had that nest egg, I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound wistful. He was so excited about his woodworking shop. It's such a tragedy he never got the chance to build it. It certainly is, Mr. Davison agreed. A fine young man, and you're right, it was a substantial sum. We had just finished transferring the final amount to his personal account the week before he passed. His personal account. Not their joint account. That was a crucial detail. Leo had wanted to keep the business funds separate, to be clear and professional from the start. Evelyn must be relieved to have that security, at least, I probed. There was a slight pause. Well, yes, he said, his tone becoming more formal. Mrs. Hale became the sole beneficiary of all his accounts upon his death, including that one. It's standard procedure. Standard procedure. With one violent push, Evelyn had not only extinguished my brother's life and his dream, but she had also rewrote his future directly into her own bank account. The motive was no longer a vague suspicion. It was a number with 6 zeros after it. But this still wasn't proof of murder. It was just a motive, and a common one at that. I needed something that tied her to the act itself. My mind kept returning to the house, the scene of the crime. Evelyn had been so quick to change things afterward. The most significant change, the one that had seemed so understandable at the time, was the basement stairs. Less than 2 weeks after the funeral, she'd had them completely recarpeted. I can't bear to look at that old wood runner, she had sobbed to me over the phone. I keep picturing him. I need to cover it up. I had murmured my sympathies, thinking it was a natural, if drastic, reaction to trauma. Now it seemed like a frantic effort to erase any possible evidence. What could have been there? A scuff mark from his shoes as he lost his balance? A fiber from her own clothing? Something, anything that contradicted the narrative of a simple, solitary fall. The problem was, the evidence was gone, buried under a layer of plush beige carpeting. I had to get into that house. The thought made my palms sweat. but I needed a plausible reason, a Trojan horse that would get me inside without raising suspicion. I spent an entire evening brainstorming, discarding one flimsy excuse after another. Finally, I landed on something that felt right. Leo had been an avid reader, and he'd borrowed a box of my old college textbooks for a history course he was taking for fun. I had forgotten all about them until now. It was perfect. It was a tangible link to Leo, an excuse rooted in a shared memory, and it gave me a reason to need to go into his old office, which was adjacent to the basement door. I rehearsed the phone call in my head a dozen times, practicing the right blend of melancholy and practicality. When I finally dialed her number, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. She answered on the second ring, her voice as warm and welcoming as ever. "Clara, so good to hear from you. Is little Lily feeling better?" "Much better, thanks," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Listen, Evelyn, I know this is a strange request, but something just occurred to me. Do you remember that box of my old history books Leo borrowed? I need one of them back for a work project of all things. I was wondering if I could possibly swing by sometime tomorrow to grab it. I know exactly where he kept them in his office." I held my breath, waiting for her response. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line, a beat of hesitation that felt an hour long. Was she suspicious? Did my voice betray my terror? Then she laughed, a light, airy sound. "Of course, sweetie, don't be silly. The house is your house. Come by any time. How about in the afternoon? I'll put on a pot of tea." "That would be lovely," I said, relief and dread warring within me. "I'll see you around too." As I hung up, I felt a grim sense of victory. I had my way in. But the victory was hollow. I was willingly walking into the home of my brother's killer. I would be sitting in her kitchen, drinking her tea, making small talk, all while my mind was screaming, "Murderer, murderer, murderer." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I planned my visit with the precision of a military operation. I would keep the conversation light. I would feign distraction. I would find a reason to be alone in the office for as long as possible. My goal was no longer just about the stairs. It was about finding anything. A misplaced document, a diary, a computer file. Something he might have left behind, something she might have overlooked. As I got dressed the next day, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were hard, her mouth set in a determined line. The soft, grieving sister was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who was about to lie to a killer's face, and who was terrified she wouldn't be good enough at it to walk out of that house alive. The walk up to the front door of the house Leo and Evelyn had shared was the longest I've ever taken. Every detail of the familiar walkway, the slightly crooked paving stone, the cheerful blue welcome mat, the pot of wilting mums on the porch, seemed grotesquely normal, a placid facade for the horror it concealed. The house itself looked the same, a lovely two-story colonial that had always felt so full of warmth and laughter. Now it felt like a mausoleum. I rang the bell, my hand trembling slightly, and took a deep, steadying breath. When Evelyn opened the door, she was the picture of gentle sorrow. She wore a soft gray sweater, her hair was pulled back neatly, and her smile was warm but tinged with a practiced sadness. "Clara, come in," she said, enveloping me in a hug. Her perfume, the same light floral scent she'd worn for years, was cloying, suffocating. I had to fight the urge to recoil. "It's so good to see you. I've just put the kettle on." I stepped inside, my eyes immediately drawn to the hallway table where she must have placed her laptop that day. I could almost see the ghost of the image, the portal through which my daughter had witnessed a murder. The living room was immaculate, a shrine to my brother. His photograph was everywhere, on the mantelpiece, on the side tables, on the walls. There he was, smiling his goofy, infectious smile, frozen in time, while his killer served me tea. "The house looks beautiful, Evelyn," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "You're keeping it up so well." "It's all I have left of him," she said, her lower lip trembling just so. "Keeping his home perfect feels like I'm keeping his memory alive." We sat in the kitchen, a space that had hosted countless happy family dinners, and made stilted small talk over Earl Grey tea. She asked about Lily, about my work. I answered in monosyllables, my mind racing, searching for a way to get to the office. Every sip of tea felt like poison, every polite smile a betrayal. My eyes kept darting toward the door at the end of the hall, the one that led to the basement. The new beige carpet was visible even from here, a clean, sterile scar covering up a dirty secret. My opportunity came when Evelyn's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and sighed. "It's my mother. I should probably take this. She worries." She stood up. "I'll just be in the other room for a minute. Make yourself at home." This was it. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Actually," I said, trying to sound casual, "while you do that, I'll just pop into Leo's office and find those books. I don't want to take up too much of your day." "Of course, honey, you know where it is." She disappeared into the living room, her voice dropping into a hushed, sympathetic murmur. I stood up on shaky legs and walked toward the office. The door was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I was hit by the scent of him. Old books, wood polish, and that faint, spicy smell of his aftershave. It was so potent, so real, it almost brought me to my knees. For a second, I forgot why I was there. I was just a sister missing her brother, standing in his quiet, empty room. But the feeling passed, replaced by a cold urgency. I scanned the room. Bookshelves lined one wall. A large oak desk sat under the window, and in the corner was a comfortable reading chair. It was all neat, tidy, and utterly unhelpful. I went to the bookshelf where I remembered him putting my textbooks and pulled the box out, making a bit of noise for effect. But my real search had begun. I started with his desk, gently opening the drawers. They were filled with pens, bills, and ordinary office supplies. Nothing. I moved to the filing cabinet. It was all meticulously organized. Taxes, mortgage documents, car insurance. I felt a spike of panic. Time was running out. Evelyn could finish her call at any moment. I had to find something. My eyes fell on his tablet, an older model, sitting in its charging cradle on a small side table. Leo had been a bit of a tech enthusiast, always playing with new gadgets. He loved setting up little cameras around the yard to watch for birds and other wildlife. Critter cams, he called them. He was always so proud of being able to check the feed on his phone or tablet, showing me videos of a robin, building a nest or a raccoon, stealing from the bird feeder. A wild, desperate thought struck me. Had he ever put one inside? For security? It seemed unlikely, but it was a thread, and I had to pull it. I picked up the tablet. The screen lit up, demanding a password. My heart sank. Of course, I tried the obvious ones. His birthday, their anniversary, password 123. Nothing worked. I could hear Evelyn's voice winding down in the other room. I was out of time. I thought back, desperately trying to remember anything he might have used. He was sentimental. He loved his childhood dog, a scruffy terrier named Buster who had lived to the ripe old age of 16. On a whim, my fingers shaking, I typed in Buster 123. The screen unlocked. A gasp escaped my lips. I quickly swiped through his apps, my eyes scanning for anything that looked like a security or cloud camera application. There it was, an app called HomeGuard. My finger hovered over the icon. This was insane. The chances of this leading to anything were 1,000,000 to 1. But I tapped it. The app opened to a menu of camera feeds. Most were labeled with outdoor locations: backyard feeder, front porch, bluebird house. My hopes dwindled. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the list, a feed labeled simply Basement Cam. My breath hitched in my throat. I clicked on it. It opened to a page that said Live Feed Unavailable, which was expected. But below that was another option: View Recorded Clips. I tapped it. A list of video files appeared, organized by date and time. My eyes scanned down the list, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break through my chest. And there it was. A file dated 6 months ago, the day Leo died. The timestamp was for 11:02 a.m., just minutes before Evelyn had made her frantic, tearful 911 call. It was a motion-activated recording. I had found it. I had found the unthinkable. I could hear Evelyn ending her call in the living room. "It was lovely talking to you too, Mom. Bye." I had to get out of there. I couldn't watch it here. I quickly powered down the tablet and slipped it into my large purse, which I deliberately brought for this very purpose. I grabbed a heavy history textbook from the box, my hands clumsy and slick with sweat. I walked out of the office just as Evelyn was coming back into the kitchen. I held up the book, forcing a smile that felt like a painful grimace. "Found it. Sorry to be such a bother." Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered from my face to my oversized purse. For a split second, I was sure she knew. I saw a flash of something in her expression, not suspicion, but a cold, assessing clarity. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by her customary warm mask. "No bother at all, sweetie," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Are you sure you can't stay for another cup?" "I wish I could," I said, already backing toward the door. "But I need to get this to the office and then pick up Lily. Thank you so much for the tea, Evelyn." "Anytime," she said, following me to the door. "Drive safe and give my love to Lily." I fled. I didn't walk. I fled. I got into my car and locked the doors, my body racked with tremors. I had it. I had the truth, tucked away in my purse, on a small, unassuming tablet. But the weight of it felt immense, like I was carrying my brother's tombstone on my lap. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that watching that video would destroy the last vestiges of the world I once knew. The drive away from Evelyn's house was pure instinct. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, gripped the steering wheel while my mind reeled, caught in a dizzying loop of terror and triumph. I had the tablet. I had the proof. But the possession of it felt more dangerous than the ignorance had. It was a loaded gun in my purse, and I had no idea how to use it without getting myself killed. My first impulse was to drive straight home, lock the doors, and watch the video in the safety of my own living room. But the thought of viewing it there, in the space I shared with my daughter, felt like a desecration. I couldn't bring that horror into our sanctuary. Not yet. I needed a neutral space, a sterile, anonymous place where I could face the truth without the risk of contaminating my life any further. I found myself pulling into the far corner of a mostly empty parking lot for a large chain grocery store, a place of mundane errands and suburban routine. I parked facing a concrete wall, shielded from the view of the few other cars. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, amplifying the frantic thumping of my own heart. For a long moment, I just sat there, my head resting against the steering wheel, my breathing ragged. This was the point of no return. Once I pressed play, everything would change. Evelyn would no longer be my grieving sister-in-law. She would be a murderer. My brother would no longer be the victim of a tragic accident. He would be a murder victim. And I would be the keeper of a truth so monstrous it could shatter our entire family. With trembling hands, I took the tablet out of my purse. The screen felt cold and heavy in my lap. I powered it on, my fingers fumbling as I typed in the password, Buster123. The familiar home screen appeared, a cheerful photo of Leo and Evelyn on a beach vacation, smiling into the camera. The image was a cruel joke. I navigated back to the HomeGuard app, my stomach churning with a nauseous mixture of dread and anticipation. I opened the basement cam folder and found the file. The date and time seared themselves into my memory. I took one last shuddering breath and pressed play. The video flickered to life. The quality was grainy, the colors slightly washed out, but the image was clear enough. It was a wide-angle shot from a high corner of Leo's basement workshop, aimed at the landing and the top few steps of the stairs. The camera's perspective was cold, impartial, a silent electronic witness. For the first few seconds, the frame was empty. I could hear faint background noises, the distant hum of a refrigerator, the muffled sound of a car driving by outside. Then I heard my brother's voice, cheerful and off-camera. "Just heading down to the cave to get that clamp," he called out. A moment later, he walked into the frame. He was wearing his favorite faded t-shirt and jeans, a light dusting of sawdust on his shoulders. He looked so alive, so real, it was like a physical blow. He turned toward the basement door, his back to the camera. And then Evelyn appeared. She entered the frame from the left, walking quickly, her movements sharp and purposeful. Her face was not the soft, grieving mask I was used to. It was a tight, angry knot of resentment. "Leo, we are not done talking about this," she said, her voice low and hard, stripped of all its usual warmth. The audio was tinny, but her fury was unmistakable. "There's nothing to talk about, Ev," Leo said, his back still to her, as he reached for the doorknob. "I'm signing the lease this afternoon. It's happening. It's my money, my dream." "Your dream?" She spat the words. "What about my dream? What about our security? You are throwing our future away on a stupid, selfish hobby." "It's not a hobby," he shot back, finally turning to face her. The argument was raw, ugly. I was seeing a side of their marriage I never knew existed. He looked tired of the fight. "I'm not doing this again. I'm going to be late." He turned his back on her again, opening the basement door. He took one step onto the landing. And then it happened. It happened exactly as Lily had described it, but it was 1,000 times more brutal than a child's crayon drawing could ever convey. Evelyn moved forward, her face a mask of cold, calculated rage. She didn't hesitate. She raised both hands and shoved him hard in the center of his back. It wasn't a trip. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, violent act of malice. Leo cried out, a sharp, surprised sound that was cut short as he pitched forward, disappearing from the camera's view. The sound that followed was a sickening series of thuds, a sound that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. The camera kept rolling. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs, perfectly still, her hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't rushing to help. She was just watching, listening. Her expression was unreadable, a blank canvas of something far beyond grief or shock. It was the face of someone who had just solved a problem. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, a full 30 seconds of absolute silence from the bottom of the stairs. Then she slowly, deliberately, smoothed down her sweater, turned and walked out of the frame. The video continued for another minute, showing nothing but the empty landing and the open door to the basement. A dark, waiting mouth. Then the recording ended. I didn't realize I was screaming until my throat was raw. It was a horrible, guttural sound of pure agony. I threw open the car door and stumbled out into the parking lot, vomiting onto the asphalt. The truth was a physical poison, and my body was trying to expel it. I collapsed against the side of my car, sobbing, my body shaking uncontrollably. It was real. It was all real. My sister-in-law, the woman who had held my hand at my brother's funeral, had murdered him. She had stood there and listened to him die. And then she had gone to her laptop, composed her face into a mask of concern, and lied to my 7-year-old daughter. The rage that followed the grief was a white-hot inferno. It burned away the tears, the shock, the fear. All that was left was a singular, clarifying purpose. She was not going to get away with this. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, my body still trembling, but my mind hardening into steel. I got back in the car, my hands steady now. I had the truth. I had the weapon. Now I was going to war. The world outside my car window seemed to be moving in slow motion, the mundane scenes of afternoon traffic and pedestrians carrying on with their lives, oblivious to the cataclysm that had just occurred in the driver's seat of a parked sedan. My own world had been irrevocably shattered, and the aftershocks were still coursing through me. The raw, visceral horror of watching the video had given way to a chilling, almost supernatural clarity. There were no more doubts, no more maybes. There was only the cold, hard certainty of what Evelyn had done. My first instinct, the one screaming in my head, was to drive straight to the nearest police station, slam the tablet on the counter, and demand justice. But a sliver of caution, a voice of reason that sounded suspiciously like my brother's, held me back. I was a mess. My eyes were red and swollen from crying. My clothes were disheveled, and I probably smelled of vomit. If I walked into a police station in this state, ranting about a secret video and my sister-in-law the murderer, how seriously would they take me? They might see me as a hysterical, grieving woman succumbing to paranoia. They might take the tablet, but what if they mishandled it? What if they accidentally deleted the file? What if Evelyn had a powerful lawyer who could somehow get it dismissed as inadmissible? The video was my only piece of concrete evidence. I couldn't risk losing control of it. I needed a plan. I needed to be calm, rational, and strategic. I drove home, my mind working faster than it ever had before. The first thing I did when I walked through my front door was back up the video. I connected the tablet to my laptop and, with shaking hands, managed to copy the file. I then uploaded it to a secure cloud storage account under a fake name, and for good measure, I copied it again onto a small encrypted USB drive, which I hid in a hollowed-out book on my shelf. Now the evidence existed in 4 separate places. She couldn't make it disappear. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. My next thought was of Lily. She was the beginning of all this, the innocent catalyst. I had to protect her, not just from Evelyn, but from the fallout that was to come. The police, the courts, the media. It would be a storm, and I needed to be her anchor. I called my sister, Sarah, who lived 3 states away. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I couldn't bear to speak the words out loud again. I just told her there was a family emergency, and I needed her to come. That I needed help with Lily. Sarah, bless her, didn't ask too many questions. She heard the ragged terror in my voice and simply said, "I'll be on the first flight tomorrow morning." Knowing she was coming, that I wouldn't be completely alone in this, was a small comfort, a single flickering candle in the suffocating darkness. Now I could focus on the police. I looked up the number for the non-emergency line of the local police department. I couldn't just walk in. I had to make sure I got the right person, someone who would listen, someone who wouldn't dismiss me. I asked to be put through to the detectives division. After being transferred twice, a tired-sounding male voice answered, "Detective Murphy." I took a deep breath. "My name is Clara Hale," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to report a murder." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay, ma'am, whose murder are you reporting?" "My brother's, Leo Vance. His death was ruled an accident 6 months ago, but I have new evidence. I have video evidence that he was pushed." "Video evidence?" The detective's tone shifted slightly, a flicker of professional interest cutting through the weariness. "Yes, I have a video of the entire event. I need to speak with someone in person. I need to show you what I have." He told me to come down to the station. He gave me his name again, Detective Miller, not Murphy, I'd misheard, and told me to ask for her at the front desk. I wrote her name down, Detective Miller. It felt important to have a name. I changed my clothes, washed my face, and tried to make myself look as sane and credible as possible. I put the tablet in my purse, leaving my phone at home so there was no chance of Evelyn trying to call me, no chance of my resolve wavering. The drive to the station was different this time. The terror was still there, but it was overlaid with a grim sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim of this knowledge. I was its agent. I was the instrument of my brother's justice. The police station was an imposing brick building, cold and impersonal. Inside, it smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I walked to the front desk, my heart pounding a steady, heavy beat, and asked for Detective Miller. A few minutes later, a woman in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor came out to greet me. She led me to a small, windowless room with a metal table and a few uncomfortable chairs. An interrogation room. The reality of the situation hit me with renewed force. "I'm Detective Miller," she said, her voice calm and even. "You said on the phone you have evidence regarding the death of your brother, Leo Vance." "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I took the tablet out of my purse and placed it on the table between us. His wife, Evelyn Hale, told everyone he tripped and fell down the basement stairs. But she lied. She pushed him, and I can prove it. Detective Miller's expression remained neutral. a carefully practiced mask of professional skepticism. She had probably heard 100 wild accusations fueled by grief and family disputes. "Okay, Mrs. Hale, why don't you start from the beginning and tell me everything?" I told her the whole story, starting with the phone call from Lily's teacher and the crayon drawing. I told her about my growing suspicions, about the financial motive, and about my visit to the house. My voice was flat, detached, as I recounted the events. When I got to the part about the video, I slid the tablet across the table. "Leo had a motion-activated camera in his workshop," I said. "It recorded everything. The file is in an app called HomeGuard." Her eyebrows raised slightly, the first crack in her professional veneer. She took the tablet and examined it. "You're willing to let us view this file?" "I'm willing to let you see the truth," I said. She nodded, then stood up. "I'm going to take this to our tech department to have the file properly extracted and viewed. I need you to wait here. This might take some time." She left the room, taking the tablet with her, and I was alone. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I sat there staring at the blank walls of the tiny room, my mind a whirlwind of fear and hope. What if she didn't believe me? What if she thought I had doctored the video? Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. I thought about Leo, about his easy laugh and his kind heart. I thought about Lily, safe at a friend's house for a sleepover, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. I was doing this for them. I had to be strong for them. Nearly an hour passed. I was beginning to think they had forgotten about me, or worse, dismissed me and sent me on my way. Then the door opened. Detective Miller stood there, but she was not alone. A tall, serious-looking man in a suit stood beside her. Her expression was completely different. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a look of grim certainty. "Mrs. Hale," she said, her voice now filled with a new gravity. "We've seen the video. I need you to come with me and make a formal recorded statement. We are going to be securing a warrant for Evelyn Hale's arrest." The relief was so profound, so overwhelming, it felt like a physical weight had been lifted from my soul. I started to cry, not from sorrow this time, but from the shattering release of 6 months of buried truth. The wheels of justice, which I had feared would be impossible to turn, were, finally, irrevocably, beginning to move. Making the formal statement was an ordeal. I sat in a different, slightly larger room with Detective Miller and the man in the suit, who introduced himself as Detective Morrison, her partner. A small tape recorder sat on the table between us. They asked me to recount everything again, this time for the official record. I went through the story methodically, from Ms. Albright's phone call to the moment I watched the video in the grocery store parking lot. I tried to keep my voice even, to stick to the facts, but when I had to describe the video itself, the argument, the push, the sickening sound of my brother falling, my voice broke, and the tears I had been holding back began to fall. Detective Miller was patient, pushing a box of tissues across the table and waiting for me to compose myself before continuing. When I was finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "Clara," Detective Miller said, using my first name for the first time, her tone softening with a hint of compassion. "What you've done took an incredible amount of courage." "I just want justice for my brother," I whispered. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure that happens," she assured me. "The warrant is being processed as we speak. We'll likely execute it this evening." The thought of Evelyn being arrested, of police cars pulling up to the house where she had murdered my brother was both terrifying and deeply satisfying. But then, Detective Miller's expression grew more serious. "There's something else we'd like to discuss with you, something that could significantly strengthen our case." I looked at her, confused. "What more do you need? You have the video." "The video is powerful," Detective Morrison chimed in, his voice a low rumble. "But a good defense attorney will try to tear it apart. They'll claim it's been manipulated. They'll say the angle is deceptive. They'll argue it doesn't show clear intent. But a confession is ironclad." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I knew what they were going to ask before the words left her mouth. "We want you to talk to her," Miller said gently. "We want you to wear a wire." The room seemed to shrink around me. The thought of facing Evelyn again, of having a conversation with her knowing she was a murderer, and that every word was being recorded by the police, was beyond terrifying. I don't know if I can do that," I stammered. She'll know. She'll sense something is wrong." "We think you can," Miller countered, her voice firm but encouraging. "You're the only one she might still trust, the only one she might let her guard down with. We don't need a full confession on tape. We just need something that shows she knows more than she's letting on. A veiled threat, an admission that it wasn't a simple accident. Anything to corroborate what's on that video." They laid out the plan. I would call her. I would sound distraught, confused. I would tell her I found something of Leo's, a journal, a video diary, something vague, that was making me question what happened. I would ask to meet her somewhere public, somewhere she would feel in control. A park, a coffee shop. They would be nearby, watching and listening to every word. I sat there, my mind racing. Part of me was screaming to say no, to run from this insane idea. It was too much, too dangerous. But another part of me, the part that was fueled by that cold, hard rage, knew they were right. This was my chance to not just be a witness, but to be an active participant in her downfall. It was my chance to look her in the eye and know I was helping to put her away forever. It was the last thing I could do for Leo. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling like it belonged to someone else. "I'll do it." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. A female officer fitted me with the recording device, a tiny microphone taped to my chest with a small transmitter, hidden in the small of my back. It felt alien against my skin, a constant, chilling reminder of the deception I was about to undertake. They coached me on what to say, how to guide the conversation without being too obvious. "Let her do most of the talking," Miller advised. "People love to talk. And criminals, especially arrogant ones, often can't help but brag or threaten." They had me make the call from a landline at the station. I dialed Evelyn's number, my thumb hovering over the last digit for a full 10 seconds, before I could bring myself to press it. She answered on the third ring. "Clara, is everything okay?" Her voice was laced with that familiar, false concern. I took a shaky breath, channeling every ounce of genuine fear and sorrow I possessed. "Evelyn," I said, letting my voice crack, I need to see you. I need to talk to you." "Sweetie, what's wrong? You sound awful." "I was going through some of Leo's old things," I lied, sticking to the script. I found his old tablet. He kept a sort of video diary on it, and he recorded something the day he died. "Evelyn, I'm so confused. It doesn't make any sense. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the rapid calculation of risk and response. "A video diary?" she finally said, her voice a little tighter now. That's ridiculous. Leo never did anything like that." "I need to show you," I insisted, pushing a note of hysteria into my voice. "I need you to help me understand what I'm seeing. Can we meet, please?" Another pause. "Where are you?" "I'm just driving around. I can't go home. Can we meet at Northwood Park, by the duck pond, in half an hour?" I chose the place deliberately. It was open, with plenty of places for the police to be without being seen. "All right," she said, her voice now cold and clipped. "Half an hour." She hung up without saying goodbye. I looked up at the detectives. "She's coming." "You did? Great, Clara," Miller said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "We'll be right there with you. Just remember to stay calm. We've got you." As I drove to the park, with an unmarked police car trailing a discreet distance behind me, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a feeling of profound, righteous purpose. This was the final act. I was the bait, and the trap was set. The monster was coming to meet me, and this time she wouldn't be able to just walk away. Northwood Park was bathed in the soft golden light of the setting sun. Families were packing up their picnic blankets, and joggers were taking their final laps around the pond. It was a scene of such perfect, tranquil domesticity that it felt like it belonged on another planet. I sat on a bench facing the water, the cool metal a stark contrast to the heat of anxiety coiling in my stomach. The hidden microphone felt like a burning coal against my skin. I watched the ducks glide across the water, their movements serene and effortless, and envied their simple existence. I had chosen this bench because it was isolated, with a clear view of the approaching path, but also near a thicket of trees where I knew a team of plainclothes officers, including Miller and Morrison, were now concealed. I wasn't alone, but I had never felt more so. I saw her before she saw me. She was walking quickly, her posture rigid, her purse clutched in her hand like a weapon. The soft, grieving mask was gone. The face she wore now was the one I had seen in the video, hard, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth. She wasn't coming to comfort her distraught sister-in-law. She was coming to assess a threat. She stopped in front of my bench, her shadow falling over me. "Clara," she said, her voice flat, "you look terrible." "I feel terrible," I said, looking up at her. I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice. "Evelyn, the video." "There is no video," she cut me off, her eyes scanning the park around us, sharp and paranoid. "Leo was a clumsy man. He left a toolbox at the top of the stairs. He tripped. It was a tragic, horrible accident. That is the story. Do you understand me?" Her tone was chilling. This was not a conversation between family members. This was an order. "But I saw it," I pressed, my voice rising with practiced hysteria. "I saw you two arguing. I saw you touch him." I couldn't bring myself to say the word push. "You're grieving," she said, sitting down beside me, her presence feeling like a physical weight. She placed a hand on my arm, and her touch was like ice. "Your mind is playing tricks on you. You're overwrought. You're inventing things because you can't accept the simple, senseless reality of an accident." She was trying to gaslight me, to convince me I was crazy. It was a masterful performance, but I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. "Why were you arguing, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "What were you fighting about that morning?" She stiffened. "We weren't fighting. We were having a discussion about finances. Normal married couple things. You're twisting everything." "He was going to sign the lease for his workshop that day," I said, watching her face carefully. "You didn't want him to. You called his dreams selfish." A flash of pure, unadulterated fury crossed her features before she could conceal it. "He was being selfish," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "He was going to bankrupt us with that ridiculous fantasy. I spent years supporting him, propping up his ego, and he was going to throw it all away. I built our life, and he was going to tear it down for a pile of sawdust." The confession, when it came, was not a direct admission of murder, but of motive. It was a confession of her soul, of the deep, festering resentment she had hidden for years behind a smile. "So you stopped him," I said, the words hanging in the air between us. She turned to me, her eyes boring into mine. They were cold, empty pools of darkness. The mask was completely gone now. I was seeing the real Evelyn. "He tripped Clara," she said, her voice low and menacing, each word a carefully placed stone. "He was careless, and you should be careful too. You have a daughter to think about, Lily. It would be a shame if something were to happen to you, too. Some things are better left buried, for Lily's sake." It was there, the threat, the undeniable proof of her guilt, spoken from her own lips. It was more than the detectives had hoped for. A cold wave of triumph washed over me, so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I had done it. I had her. As if on cue, I saw movement from the corner of my eye. Detective Miller and 2 uniformed officers were walking calmly but purposefully down the path toward us. Evelyn followed my gaze. Her eyes widened, first in confusion and then in dawning, horrified realization. Her face, which had been a mask of cold control, collapsed in on itself. Panic, raw and ugly, twisted her features. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She lunged at me, her hands reaching for my throat, but she was too late. The officers were there, grabbing her arms, pulling her away from me. "Evelyn Hale," Miller said, her voice ringing with authority, "you are under arrest for the murder of Leo Vance. You have the right to remain silent." Evelyn fought against them, a cornered animal, her eyes wild with fury and disbelief. All her carefully constructed composure had shattered, revealing the violent, raging monster beneath. "You!" she screamed at me, her voice a raw, ragged sound of pure hatred, as they forced her hands behind her back, and the handcuffs clicked shut. "You bitch! You signed your own death warrant!" The raw, unveiled malice in her voice was the last piece of the puzzle, the final confirmation of the evil I had been living alongside for years. I just sat there on the bench, shaking as they led her away. I watched until the police car pulled away, its sirens silent, and disappeared down the street. And then the strength that had carried me through the last few days finally deserted me. I buried my face in my hands and wept. I wept for my brother. I wept for the family I had lost. And I wept for the terrible, beautiful, innocent truth that my daughter's simple crayon drawing had finally brought into the light. The aftermath was a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a life from the rubble. Evelyn's arrest sent shockwaves through our community. The story of the basement widow, as the local news dubbed her, was a lurid tale of suburban betrayal that captivated the public. They painted her as a cold, calculating black widow who had murdered her husband for his inheritance. They weren't wrong, but the stark, sensational headlines couldn't capture the nuanced horror of it all. The years of hidden resentment, the violation of trust, the intimate, familial nature of the evil. My sister, Sarah, was my rock. She arrived the morning after the arrest and simply took over. She managed the house, cooked meals I couldn't eat, and most importantly, she created a protective bubble around Lily. We made the decision to shield Lily from the truth of her role in the investigation. To her, Auntie had simply gone away for a very long time. It was a necessary fiction. The weight of what she had seen was a burden no child should ever have to carry consciously. My testimony, along with the video and the damning recording from the park, formed the unshakable core of the prosecution's case. Evelyn's trial was mercifully swift. Her high-priced lawyer tried everything. He attempted to portray me as an unstable, jealous sister, hell-bent on destroying Evelyn out of grief and spite. He claimed the video was a deep fake, a sophisticated forgery I had created. He argued that the recording in the park was an illegal entrapment, my words goading a grieving widow into saying things she didn't mean. But the evidence was too powerful, too visceral. The jury watched the grainy video from the basement cam, and I saw their faces change, their expressions shifting from skepticism to horror. They listened to the audio recording from the park, heard the cold, menacing threat in Evelyn's own voice. It took them less than 3 hours to convict her of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Evelyn showed no emotion. She just stared at me from across the courtroom, her eyes filled with a chilling, bottomless hatred. There was no remorse, no flicker of regret. There was only the cold fury of a predator who had been outsmarted. I felt no triumph in that moment, only a profound and weary sadness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring my brother back. It couldn't erase the scars. Life after the trial was quiet. The media eventually moved on to the next sensational story. The phone calls from curious neighbors stopped. The world kept turning. Sarah stayed for another month, helping me pack up my house. We couldn't stay there anymore. It was too close to the memories, too close to the house down the street that now sat empty, a monument to a terrible crime. We found a small house in a town an hour away, a place with no history for us, a blank slate. It had a big backyard with an old oak tree perfect for a swing. As we settled in, I found myself reflecting on the nature of evil. I had always thought of it as something dramatic and obvious, a monster with fangs and claws. But I had learned it was often quiet, patient, and wore a familiar face. It could sit at your dinner table, hug your child, and weep at your brother's funeral. The most dangerous monsters are the ones you invite into your home. I also learned about the nature of truth. It's resilient. It can be buried, hidden, and denied, but it has a way of rising to the surface, often in the most unexpected ways. In my case, it came in the form of a child's crayon drawing, a simple, honest rendering of a memory that a 7-year-old was too innocent to understand. Lily was the hero of this story, and she would never even know it. Her simple act of drawing a memory had unraveled a perfect murder. Her innocence had been a light powerful enough to penetrate the darkest of deceptions. Months turned into a year. We built a new life, a quiet one. I found a new job. Lily started at a new school and made new friends. We planted a garden in the backyard. Sometimes, in the quiet moments of the evening after Lily was asleep, I would take out the hollowed-out book and look at the small USB drive hidden inside. I never watched the video again, but I kept it as a reminder. A reminder of what was lost, but also of what was saved. One sunny afternoon, I was watching Lily draw at the kitchen table. She was humming to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. I saw she was drawing a picture of our new house. She drew the big oak tree, the swing, the flower garden. She drew 2 stick figures holding hands in the front yard, a woman and a little girl. Underneath them, in her careful second-grade printing, she wrote, "Mommy and me, happy." A tear rolled down my cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of sorrow or of fear. It was a tear of gratitude. The world was not the safe, predictable place I had once believed it to be. But in the midst of the darkness, we had found our way back to the light. We had survived. And for us, that was a victory more profound and more meaningful than any courtroom verdict. We were happy, and we were free.